You turn on the tap this morning. Water comes out, it always does. You don't think twice about it. Why would you? But 3 states away, the 2 largest reservoirs in the country just sank to a level they haven't seen since the 1960s, and the federal government just signed off on a decision that's going to reshape how tens of millions of people live, farm, and grow their cities for the next 2 years. You've probably heard the West is in a drought 100 times before. It's become background noise, the kind of headline you scroll past without reading. But what actually happened this month is different. This time, the warning didn't stay a warning. It became a rule, with real numbers attached to real states. So what really happened, and why does it reach all the way to your kitchen faucet, even if you've never set foot in Arizona? Let's go back to the beginning. The Colorado River isn't just a river, it's the water supply for roughly 40 million people. According to the U.S. Department of the Interior, it irrigates millions of acres of farmland across 7 states. It powers cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles, and it generates hydropower that feeds the electrical grid across the entire Southwest. For more than 2 decades, this river has been shrinking, slowly, quietly, one dry winter at a time. On August 21, 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation finalized new operating guidelines for how the river will be managed through 2027 and 2028. This wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a draft sitting in a public comment period. It was a signed federal decision. Under the new rules, California, Arizona, and Nevada, known together as the river's lower basin, must collectively cut their water use by 1.25 million acre-feet every single year. To put that number in perspective, 1 acre-foot is roughly enough water to supply 2 average households for an entire year. Arizona takes the biggest hit. It has to cut about 760,000 acre-feet. California follows at roughly 440,000. Nevada, the smallest user of the 3, absorbs a 50,000 acre-foot reduction. Mexico, which receives Colorado River water under a decades-old treaty with the United States, agreed separately to reduce its own intake by 250,000 acre-feet. Here's the detail that made this month different from every other drought update you've scrolled past without clicking. As of August 20th, Lake Powell, one of the river's 2 mega reservoirs, sat at just 3,519 feet above sea level. That's only 9 feet above the point where Glen Canyon Dam could lose the ability to generate hydropower altogether. 9 feet. Combined, Lake Powell and Lake Mead haven't been this low since Powell first began filling behind its dam back in 1963. 6 decades of accumulated water storage gone. This didn't come out of nowhere, either. Earlier in August, federal officials had already confirmed that Arizona and Nevada would face another year of what's called Tier 1 shortage cuts, the 5th year in a row under that designation. The interim rules that had governed the river since 2007, later tightened by emergency guidelines in 2019, were always set to expire in 2027. Basin states knew this deadline was coming for years. They negotiated, they missed deadlines. They negotiated again. And now, with the clock finally running out, the federal government stepped in and finalized the plan itself. Why is this suddenly the story everyone in the water world is talking about, when the drought itself isn't new? Because for the first time in years, the federal government stopped negotiating and started deciding. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum framed the moment as one of shared responsibility, thanking what he called the 7 basin states, 30 basin tribes, and Mexico for the input that shaped the plan. Andrea Travnicek, the Interior Department's Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, put the timeline in blunt terms. She said the region has been living through what she called a 26-year prolonged drought, and that everyone in the basin needs to keep working together, because the dry conditions aren't going away anytime soon. That's the official framing: necessary, overdue, a shared sacrifice designed to keep the entire system from collapsing. But not everyone in the basin sees it that way. Here's where the story gets more complicated and more human. The cuts fall almost entirely on the lower basin, meaning Arizona, California, and Nevada. The upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, face no mandatory reductions at all under this plan, only voluntary ones. If you're a farmer in Arizona or a city planner in Las Vegas, that split can look less like shared sacrifice and more like geography deciding who pays the price first. That tension isn't hypothetical anymore. On August 24, Nevada filed a lawsuit against the federal government over the new Colorado River cuts. That's not a press release, and it's not a strongly worded statement. That's a formal legal challenge, filed within days of the rules being finalized. Meanwhile, in Arizona, water officials struck a noticeably different tone. Tom Bashatsky, director of the state's Department of Water Resources, thanked California and Nevada for what he called collaboration on sharing the burden, saying the new reductions give the region, in his words, substantial stability heading into 2027 and 2028. So you've got one state suing the federal government, another state calling the exact same decision a win, both looking at the same document and reaching completely different conclusions. What's actually driving that disagreement isn't just the numbers on a page. It's a deeper question that's been simmering in the American West for 100 years. When a shared resource runs low, who decides who gives up water first, and who still gets to keep growing? Farmers argue they're being asked to sacrifice livelihoods built over generations, watching fields go fallow to protect a system they didn't design. Fast-growing cities argue they can't build new housing or attract new industry without ironclad water guarantees. Tribal nations, 30 of them recognized as basin stakeholders, hold long-standing water rights that in many cases predate the very cities now competing for the same river. There isn't a version of this decision that leaves every one of those groups satisfied. That's not spin from one side or the other. That's simply the math of a shrinking river and a growing population trying to share what's left of it. Zoom out, and this stops being a regional water fight and starts looking like a preview of something bigger. The Colorado River Basin is one of the clearest real-time examples anywhere in the world of what happens when climate conditions shift faster than the legal and political systems built to manage them. The rules governing this river were largely written back in 1922, when the basin's population, its cities, and its climate looked nothing like they do today. Nobody negotiating that original agreement was planning for a Phoenix or a Las Vegas of today's size. Every few years, reality forces another renegotiation, another round of tense meetings, another deadline that basin states have already missed more than once. This month's decision is really just the latest chapter in a century-long argument between old paperwork and a changing climate. It's worth asking why this particular river keeps making headlines when there are dozens of major river systems across the globe under similar pressure. Part of the answer is scale. Part of it is visibility. Lake Mead is the kind of place millions of people have actually stood next to, boated on, or driven past on a road trip, which makes the shrinking shoreline impossible to ignore. But the deeper answer is that the Colorado River sits at the exact intersection of everything that makes water scarcity hard to manage anywhere: multiple states, multiple countries, tribal sovereignty, big agriculture, and some of the fastest population growth in the country, all drawing from one increasingly unpredictable source. And here's the part that connects it back to you, wherever you happen to be watching this from. You may never draw a single glass of water from the Colorado River in your life, but the river irrigates crops that end up in grocery stores across the entire country, from lettuce to almonds to cotton. It powers a stretch of the electrical grid that keeps homes, hospitals, and data centers running across the Southwest. It shapes housing costs and growth limits in some of the fastest growing metro areas in America, places that millions of people are actively moving to right now. It even shapes vacations. Marinas on Lake Mead have already had to relocate their docks further out, chasing a shoreline that keeps retreating year after year. When a river this size gets rationed, the ripple doesn't stay contained inside one basin. It shows up later, in a produce aisle, in an electricity bill, in a headline about a city that suddenly can't approve new housing permits because there isn't enough water on paper to support them. Would you have guessed that a decision signed in a federal office in August could quietly follow you all the way to your grocery cart next spring? So what happens next? The current plan runs through 2028, but it was built with flexibility in mind, not certainty. Water levels are checked every year, and if Lake Mead or Lake Powell keep dropping, deeper cuts are already written into the framework as a real possibility, not just a guarantee that things will stay as they are. Meanwhile, Nevada's lawsuit will wind its way through the courts, adding a legal layer on top of a fight that's already political, economic, and environmental all at once. The 7 basin states are also supposed to be working toward a longer-term agreement to replace these guidelines once they expire, though those broader talks have stalled before, more than once, missing deadline after deadline after deadline. None of this is going away quietly, and none of it has one clean villain or one clean hero to root for or against. There's a federal government trying to keep a century-old system from breaking under modern pressure. There are states trying to protect the people, farms, and industries that depend on them. There's a river that simply doesn't hold as much water as it used to, no matter what any document, any lawsuit, or any press conference says about it. You turned on the tap this morning and water came out. It always does. Until, one year, in one of the driest corners of the country, it doesn't come out quite the way it used to. That's not a prediction sitting somewhere off in the future. That's already happening, right now, to millions of people who once took their water for granted in exactly the same way you did 5 minutes ago.